For example, if you are supposed to write about the crystal or central place theory, you start with crystal industrial location theory. The introduction very often is about industrial location theory was presented by Christaller in 1933. He was a German geographer and all. It's so simple and generalist beginning. Right. That's what we have been talking about, that your introduction should be a bit dynamic and should be different from the general lot. That's what you are working for. Right. Because that will be very, very generalized information. It's not talking about the historical evolution of central place theory and all. And geographical thought requires a different perspective. Right. So, we will first start with explain dualism and dichotomy with suitable examples. Right. Now, what can be the beginning here, intro? What is dualism and dichotomy?
Before positivism. Before positivism, dichotomy is
Before positivism?
positivism.
Mm-hmm.
Dichotomies and dualisms are
Isn't it the as old as the history of geography itself? Yes, it is. Though Verenius is treated as the not exactly the founder, but those who Verenius is credited for the fact that he has brought that topic on the forefront by differentiating general and spatial geography. That's what you call regional and systematic. But if you look at the in actuality, it has a history as long as the geography itself. If you look at the Plato, Strabo or Greco-Roman geographers, they started the approach inductive and deductive. What is the problem fundamental in understanding thought? That the material is not available. So, most of the students go to the internet, Wikipedia, right? And one of the most mediocre you can have the content, because you should use those internet very, very, very cautiously, because you are not simple graduate student, right? Internet is available like what one book has written, that 5 approaches of only 5. So, everybody will write 5. Some of the answers is just like that you have crammed up the introduction of Wikipedia and you have just put it, vomited in it. You might have seen some videos and each and everything is produced like that. Definitely not a way to prepare. That means very few have the proper understanding of geographical thought. What is dualism and dichotomy? Dualism is branching of subject, right? Dichotomy is conflicting ideas. Though very synonymously used, but they are a bit technically different in the sense when we talk about dualism, that means if you talk in Hindi Dvaitvad, that means you bifurcate and maybe trifurcate or further branching of the system, branching of the geography as a subject. Dichotomy is conflicting ideas, right? So, first we need to understand what is the term means. Now, if you look at dualism, it can have several perspectives. What is the importance of dualism in subject of geography or dichotomy? As an intellectual person, not as a academics of geography, but as a civil services aspirant, you need to understand that basic aspect, how it has helped evolve geography as a subject. Everywhere you will read that geography is a multifarious subject, which derives its content from different sources, right? And since the sources are many, the subject is much more complex than any other humanities subject. It is more complex than even science because it is neither pure science nor pure humanities, right? So, there the role of dualism and dichotomy comes into a big role. So, start with that. Dualism and dichotomy not only deals not only with the branching of the subject, branching of the subject matter, but also with varied idea, varied conflicting ideas, debates. Right. Both we are talking about. Instead of simply defining it, now I am using that definition to talk about its importance. So
also start like saying like the evolution of any subject goes through dualism and dichotomy.
that's what I'm coming. That's what I'm coming. I'm defining also, because the term requires a proper definition, because the definition is not very general. Because very often people don't understand it. So that's why the definition itself can be very handy. Right. So conflicting ideas which has helped geography, which has helped in the evolution of geography. Right. So you are defining it and talking about the importance also. Right. The moment you talk about this evolution of geography, then again in one go you can talk about its importance. That means it has not only simplified the complexities of geography, but also has provided enough platform for its expansion as a subject. Now anything you can choose from here, right? Because whenever a debate takes place, it always brings new ideas, and it makes the subject more dynamic. So several views is always handy for the research scholar, for the future generation. For example, just imagine if the bifurcation of geography wouldn't have been into physical and human, how difficult it would have been for us to discuss the man-environment relationship. It not only provides the platform, but also gives enough amount of scope to absorb, understand, incorporate several ideas. For example, if I am a protagonist of determinism, like let's say suppose the present environmental discussion and the role of environment, man-environment relationship is much more complex than it used to be earlier, because of the excessive interference of the humans with the environment, with the increasing technological efficiency. Right. So that has become more complex. So if I want to take into account the role of environment in humans, that is relatively as old as the geography or the humans itself. So I can talk about the environmentalists still exist. There, if I want to say that if you interfere too much with the environment, then you are going to face a lot of wrath from that. I am talking about neo-determinism, stop and go. If I am talking about no, environment is still, or human are far more superior than the environmental controls, I am talking about possibilism. If I am talking about don't interfere too much on the environment, because it will give you a backlash. Very severely you may not be able to cope up with. I am talking about determinism. So it incorporates various ideas and make the subject evolve as a dynamic concept. So geography is definitely, when you talk about, it's a multifarious subject. Hence it is much more complex than it appears. Right. Then you talk about the dualism and dichotomy. Then come back to the evolution of the topic is as old as the history of geographical thought. When the Greek scholars talks about inductive and deductive approaches for the understanding of geographical perspective. However, the real debate on the topic was started by Verenius. Right? Somebody will directly write Verenius. That means you have a very loose understanding of the topic. Verenius might be credited for making the topic as a single and unique one, but it's not he who founded that. Getting me? For example, plate tectonic theory talks about the movement of continent, but in a different manner. Now imagine, had Alfred Wegener been not there, perhaps continental drift theory might not have been there. So he must be credited for that. Though plate tectonic theory is associated with a particular individual or group of people led by W.J. Morgan, but the history behind it cannot be completely ignored. So here also, when we talk about Verenius, when he talks about general and spatial geography. Right? Now, most of you know that there are 5 dualism and dichotomy, which is well known. There can be 100 of dualism and dichotomy, right? Because obviously, when you read books, you just read whatever the content in the book is there. That means again you are just trying to learn, cram and vomit. You don't understand the topic. When we talk about dualism and dichotomy, it's only about the branching and the conflicting ideas. For example, welfare geography and radical geography are also an example of dichotomy and dualism. Dualism is a relatively broader term. Dichotomy is relatively talking about the conflicting ideas. When we talk about quantitative revolution and descriptive geography, both are dichotomy. On one particular man-environment relationship, there are several dichotomies. So how can you confine determinism and possibilism? Right? So to understand dualism and dichotomy, we need to understand the perspective through which the topic can be analyzed. For example, the content, the method and the approach. Right? Now, it may be dualism dichotomy on the basis of the content itself. The method may be itself, if I may have a different method, you may have different method to learn that. Then approaches. On these basis, there can be several dualism and dichotomy which can be identified. Now, you don't need to, like for example, when you talk about the most prominent dualism existing in geography is the division of the subject into physical and human geography. Now, you don't need to talk about the details of physical and human geography here, because they are not talking about discuss the dualism, discuss the various types of dualism and detail of it, or present a brief discussion of the dualism existing in the geographical thought. Then you need to discuss what is physical and what is human. Then you need to discuss what is determinism or what is possibilism. Here, explain dualism and dichotomy with suitable example. So you have to bring several examples to explain dualism and dichotomy. Right? So approaches, content, let's for example, agriculture as a content. Right? What can be the method? We can have agroclimatic zones. Right? Agroclimatic zones may have several approaches. I may take climate as a factor. Somebody may take human as a factor. Somebody may take mathematical tools as a factor. They go for quantification of the agricultural aspects. They are also talking about dualism and dichotomy. right? So as small as a single content can have different methods and several approaches. That's a very good example of dualism and dichotomy in geography. But broadly, the most prominent one is the physical and human geography. Right? Even human geography has further division: social geography and economic geography. That is also an example of dualism. Even social geography has various division, branching, that is settlement geography, population geography, etc. Maybe political geography. So these all are examples of dualism and dichotomy. When you talk about economic geography, again it has agricultural geography, industrial geography, and so on. Right? All are basically to understand man-environment relationship. When you go for branching, you are hitting the minute areas, and that a specific targeted approach always are very handy and helps in better understanding of the topic. For example, human geography is a broad term. If we divide that social and economic, we are not only understanding the social part and economic part separately, but one point of time we may understand the interrelationship also. So this dualism and dichotomy may not exist in real terms in man-environment relationship. Yet, it helps a lot in understanding the interrelationship and the minute details of the entire component of the topic. Right? So, obviously, physical geography also, climatology, geomorphology, biogeography, environmental geography, all are basically dualism, examples of dualism and dichotomy. When we, let's say, talk about ecosystem, right? So, for geographers, the approach to understand ecosystem will be different. For the students of botany, the approach to understand ecosystem will be different. For the ecologist, the approach to understand will be different. For those who want to go for social forestry, the approach will be different. Hope we are getting. For those who want to understand from biological perspective, let's say pollution, the approach will be different. Getting that point? So that dualism and dichotomy is not within the subject, but inter-subject and intra-subject both. So you can explain all these aspects here. Then obviously several physical geography in the approaches, the best example is determinism and possibilism. Then you can talk about the approaches, regional approach and systematic approach. Then you talk about in the approaches itself, inductive and deductive. Right? Deductive is general to particular. Inductive is particular to general. That means those geographers which has used deductive method to reach at a conclusion are basically called armchair geographers. बैठे बैठे किसी ने, जैसे the best example is Plato also. स्ट्रैबो को कर देख लीजिए आप, रिटर को देख लीजिए. They have gathered good amount of information from different discoveries and discoverers and all, and then they evolved through that. So you have general to particular. So deductive approach. Deductive approach is just sitting, collecting information, then making a law, and then you try to implement the law on different aspect. Inductive approach, you go for descriptive aspect with based on primary data, secondary data, you collect it and then you analyze the data. Inductive, right? Particular to general. You make a specific observations, you make empirical observations, then you try to understand the impact of different components and interrelationship, then you go for law making. Inductive approach. So this is also a method to look into subject matter. That's also dichotomy and dualism. Then for example, region, formal region, functional region, all are examples of dualism and dichotomy. So you take any example, don't mention the 5 mentioned in the book. That means you are simply vomiting what you have gathered from the books. You understand the basics of dualism and dichotomy and write whatever you want. Bring a lot of example from your day-to-day activities. For example, let's say economic geography. The economic geography can have various approaches. An economist will look into different perspective. Now, the impact of economic geography and social aspect. For geographers, it will be different. For economists, it will be different. For a generalist, it will be different. So, from that perspective, you keep on talking about dualism and dichotomy. You can talk about radical approaches, welfare approaches. You can talk about behavioral approaches. All these approaches are examples of dualism and dichotomy in geography. Hope we are getting that. Then in concluding remarks, you can talk again about the, like for example, you can talk about Berry's matrix. It has quantitative techniques to reach at a conclusion. For example, in regional synthesis, he has given metrics. So in that case also, you can talk about the complexities in the present scenario of the contemporary world or the contemporary scenario, man-environment relationship has undergone a sea change. Which requires an in-depth analysis of cause-effect relationship, which needs further research and more intensified work on the topic to make geographical understanding more relevant for social well-being. The problem of geographical thought and understanding of it lies in the fact that it is a relatively dry subject. Very often we don't give too much emphasis on that. We don't try to actually buzz down, and we don't give our mind a free idea. We just try to cram up whatever has been written in the book. If we understand, for example, locational analysis, even without going into the book, you know already about the topic. Spatial analysis, systematic analysis, all you can understand because you guys are mature. You are not college going student. Once you understand the topic, you can have your own idea. You can have your own expression. First you understand the topic, then go into the books. Right? If you have the topic, try to understand what do you mean by that. What is mean by analysis? To analyze location means wherever what is existing. For example, an industry is located, wherever it is located, you try why? Locational analysis. An agricultural activity, why? Locational analysis. Settlement, why? Locational analysis. Geography is all about why. Why mountains are existing in the middle of the continents. That is locational analysis. Whatever is located. But when we talk about locational in terms of a specific economic geography, that is different. In terms of physical geography, that is different. Then you can have several ideas, far more than the books itself. And that is what required to score higher marks. Any question if you want to ask? Dualism and dichotomy. Right. Hope we understand that, right? So understand the topic, be different without losing the relevance.